Welcome to this edition of Abled and On Air, the one and only program that focuses on the needs, concerns, and achievements of the differently able. I'm Lauren Seiler. Let's join in this third-part edition of Abled and On Air at the State House, Disability Awareness Day. On this edition, we focus on the mental health policy update with Ed Penquin of Disability Rights Vermont and Jack McCullough, Executive Director of Vermont's Legal Aid Mental Health Law Project. Let's take a look at this.
Thank you all for coming. And what a tremendous turnout. Are people going to forget that they've got constituents with disabilities? No. Doesn't look like it to me. Are you all taking a chance and taking an advantage of the opportunity to talk with your legislators? Please do, because that's really important.
Okay, yes, go ahead.
All right, thank you for coming in, folks. I was asked to talk for a few minutes about what is going on in the legislature this year on the subject of mental health issues. And there's a tremendous amount of issues that affect people with disabilities beyond that area, and I think other people have been talking about those kinds of things during the day. So I'm going to try and focus on mental health issues. And I would characterize almost two categories of issues that my organization, Disability Rights Vermont, has been looking at this year. One has been things that are happening, and the other is things that are not happening. And those are both particularly important this year. I'm going to start with the second category and start with a civil rights issue. I don't know how many people were aware of a bill that was S-133 last year, where the Senate started by taking a look, what they hoped would be a fairly comprehensive look at the mental health system and what kinds of needs were out there, from issues like the strength in the community system, the ability to deal with crises, the question of long wait times in emergency departments for people who are going in with a mental health crisis. And they looked at a lot of issues, and they essentially sent the Department of Mental Health and other departments home to do their homework and to come up with some reports. One of the sections of the bill that Disability Rights Vermont found particularly important, and in a certain way troubling, was a Section 5 where they asked for studies about our processes for commitment and involuntary medication, which we would often describe as forced medication. And the way the law was phrased, it almost looked like they were telling us what they wanted to get for an answer. And the department went and did their study in the interim, and this last December, came back with a report that said, here are some of the issues that are making it so that people are waiting for long periods of time in the emergency departments, and here are some of the solutions. And I looked at that section and I thought, well, this is promising, because they're acknowledging that the community mental health system is not as strong as it needs to be, and they're acknowledging that our crisis response in the community is not as strong as it needs to be. But then, without proposing a lot of good solutions, they then had a big long section in their bill where they quoted people within the system talking about how it takes too long to force treat people in the state of Vermont. Now, that struck me and a number of other advocates from Vermont Legal Aid, Vermont Psychiatric Survivors, as really almost a mischaracterization of the system. Because our experience has been in the last 3 years or so since, I can't remember the act number, but a bill called S-287 passed. A lot of the time frames had been abbreviated. The ability to do expedited hearings and stuff had been increased. And Mental Health Law Project of Vermont Legal Aid, who handles the defense in all of those cases, have said that the courts around the state had put themselves on weekly schedules such that once things were filed, they were getting their hearings actually quite rapidly. And so when people talked about it taking months, generally what the law project's experience has been, that generally meant that maybe the individual was in for an emergency evaluation and a commitment, but there was no decision to file for emergency or for involuntary medication. In other words, there were things that were taking time that weren't because of the legal system, but they were because judgment was being made. Okay, this person is agreeing to this. Let's try that for a few weeks. Let's see how things played out. Because when they said, oh, it takes months and months and months, the experience of the law project was, no, once they've been scheduled for a commitment hearing, usually it was a matter of a couple of weeks, and for a med hearing, almost always they're scheduled within the sort of what's described as a business week. So if it's on a Thursday, it might go, it might not be scheduled by next Thursday, but it would likely be the following Friday or the next Monday, those kinds of things. Fairly short periods of time. So Disability Rights Vermont and Legal Aid sat down together and we put a response to that. And then the Vermont Psychiatric Survivors also wrote a response to that report. I would encourage you to read all three, the department's Act 82, Section 5 report and our response to that, because I think there's a fair expression of the range of that issue. So why did I introduce this by saying I'm going to tell you about what's not happening? Well, what I have not seen yet this session is any serious proposal that is out there to abbreviate an individual's due process rights in involuntary treatment, which to us it's a very good thing, because it does seem as though every couple of years there will be a proposal put on the table. So that is what our organization and Vermont Legal Aid and the Psychiatric Survivors would say is some good news. There is another proposal that's just passed the Senate, and that's called S-203, and that is a bill that had started out as a short form bill that said, and I'm almost quoting it, the state will implement recommendations pursuant to Act 82, I think it was. And you look at that and you'll say, holy mackerel, what is this? And I think they did too. And they basically said, well, this was just sort of a placeholder bill to open the conversation to say, how are we going to follow up on the legislation that happened last year? And what they decided to do was to simply say, we are going to do a study of orders of non-hospitalization in the state of Vermont. Do people know what I mean when I use that term? John Pierce knows what it is.
You know what it is.
Other people do know what it is. It is an order of non-hospitalization is like a commitment, except that it occurs in the community. They are most often used after an individual has been maybe in the hospital for a while, has been through a commitment, and the medical providers are feeling as though, okay, the individual is ready to return to the community, but the providers feel there is still an issue that if the individual does not follow a course of treatment, then there is very much in danger that they would be back hospitalized very quickly. And so an agreement, generally the way it works is an agreement is made between the individuals, their lawyers, and the lawyers for the state, that this person will agree to follow a certain course of treatment. So essentially, it's what in other states they would call civil commitment. In the community, and hence the word civil, commitment because they are still under orders for treatment. And in general, those run their course. Sometimes people will be on those for a long period of time. Sometimes it's not that long. A lot of it depends on making a commitment to remain in contact with a community mental health agency. Almost always they involve an agreement to stay on a particular course of medication. And so there are people who believe that the orders are not as effective as they should be. Now, I sometimes have a hard time expressing both sides of an argument. I would say that from our side, the law provides that if an individual doesn't stay within the terms of their agreement, while that agreement is in effect, then the state has the right to bring them back to hospitalization status. On the other side, it is pointed out that that's often pretty difficult, and what the courts generally do, they make the judgment that the individual is in a state where they are meeting the original standards that got them committed in the first place. In other words, if a person has violated their order of non-hospitalization, generally the court will do nothing if the person doesn't present a danger to themselves or to somebody else. But if they do present a danger, then they'll order them recommitted to a hospitalization. So it gets a little complicated, and I'm trying to oversimplify it without oversimplifying it. So forgive me if I've left out a detail or two, because I have. But here's what they did in that committee, and it just passed the Senate, is they have said, let's set up a committee to look at orders of non-hospitalization, to analyze whether they are doing what we hope they are doing, and essentially we hope they're doing two things. And that is keeping the community safe and helping individuals to work towards their recovery. I mean, in the best of all possible worlds, that's what these mechanisms are for. So that bill just made its way through the Senate and is going to be considered in the House. So keeping an eye on that one is a good idea. We're not supposed to have food or drink in this committee, so turn your really the other way. I'm sort of speaking my throat hoarse here. So those are among the bills of substance. There's other bills that are not quite as much in the public eye. I just was asked this morning to testify on a bill that would have to do with people coming into a prison facility, whether for detention or as after sentencing. And there the committee upstairs is looking at the issue of people coming in and being taken on a course of medication that they may have been on in the community, and issues there with getting onto a different course of medication. And so that sometimes is a transition that happens very smoothly. Sometimes it's a transition that is very, very awkward. Sometimes it's a transition that is complicated by an individual being on street drugs. And so there are a lot of reasons why an individual is put onto a different course of medication But we feel, and certainly our experience at Disability Rights Vermont, is that they have to be very thoughtful about it. And before they change a person's course of medication that seems to have been successful in the community, they ought to be checking with the community providers that have prescribed that. And they ought to be making sure that they're not putting somebody onto a course of treatment that's been tried in the past and that was not successful. So that bill is waiting its way through. That's H-874. And then I'm going to get to what are maybe the most impactful, if that's a good way of putting it, things that are going on today. And those are money issues. Things that are not happening, there I would say take the biggest effect this year. And again in that S-133 that passed as H-82, part of what that bill was about was giving at least a little raise to people that we rely on for community mental health and developmental services. And when that bill passed, and when the appropriations bill passed, they funded direct service employees with about a 2.1% raise. And it's system-wide, so it doesn't mean every person got exactly 2.1%. But it allowed the system some leeway to bring up the pay of direct support workers. And part of the issue that led to that, and I don't know if the people in this room have had this experience, but we certainly see it with our clients. Case managers come and go. It is really hard for the community mental health agencies to keep themselves fully staffed, because as soon as somebody can find a better job outside the system, whether it be working for the state or for the school, for some other place where they are qualified, and the pay is a few dollars better, they leave, and you can't blame them. People have families to take care of. And so they hoped to do a couple of stages. Now they really should be looking at what does it cost to deliver good services in the face of inflation. Every business needs to look at that. I mean, if I was producing widgets at Disability Rights Vermont, one, I'd have to worry about my nonprofit status. But then secondarily to that, I'm going to have to worry about, okay, in the cost of that widget, my health insurance went up by 8% this year. How do I figure that into the price of my product? Well, we have systems for long-term care in the state that are cost-based reimbursement, and the nursing homes are an example of that. They don't get overcompensated. I can tell you, it is not easy to run a nursing home and deliver good care on what you are paid by the state. But they do get reimbursement based on what's estimated to be their cost of delivering their services. That's not true with our other long-term care services. And what that means is that agencies get really stretched thin, and they have a hard time filling vacancies, and sometimes they'll have between 25 and 28% turnover rate in the course of a year. And I run a business, Disability Rights Vermont. We're a private nonprofit, just like the mental health agencies. We're a little bit smaller than they are. We've got 15 employees statewide, and they've got probably thousands. But we have the same reality as they do. It is hard when you do not get inflation in the grants that you work under. It's hard to pay your staff what they deserve to earn, and to keep staff if they can find better jobs elsewhere. So it is a real challenge, and that is what I think some people would describe as a promise not kept. You'll hear people talk about phase 2, and phase 1 happened last year, and people were very happy about that. just something to compare it to in your mind. I think when all the negotiation is done about the state employees' contract, they will probably get about a 4% increase this year. I think it'll sugar out to be something like that. And they deserve it. Believe me, I'm not trying to cut down any group. But what we pay for our developmental and mental health services is not going up. The rate of pay is not being increased to the agencies. Now, the agencies may try to figure out ways to scrimp and save, to give people a little raise here and a little raise there. But they may also keep positions open that should be filled. And there are people who really, on the CRT program, the Community Rehabilitation and Treatment Program, who should have a good, solid relationship with a case manager. They're going to find their case manager is gone. Maybe it takes a month to fill that position. Maybe that case manager who should be seeing them once a week is only going to see them once every couple of weeks because they're stretched so thin. That's the kind of thing that we're looking at. On the plus side, the governor's budget does propose in 3 parts of the state, I think in Windham County, Washington County, and in Chittenden County, putting a small amount of money to help see if mental health can make a better connection with law enforcement and other community resources to respond to crises. There are too many crises in which, when there's some perceived danger, law enforcement is the only people who can respond, and that's really not good, because my personal belief is that in most situations there are other responses that could be more person-focused and can help diffuse and de-escalate, because law enforcement have a very difficult job. They have to be trained to do a great many things. They are better trained now than they were a few years ago to deal with mental health issues, but there's a tremendous range. Some officers are carrying around attitudes that they were trained with 30 years ago, and some are really sharp and really good at de-escalating. So that proposal, I'd say, comes in there on the plus side of things. So why don't I stop there? I think I've hit on most of the biggies, and open it up if there are questions that people have. I'll try my best to answer them. And I see Zach's hand.
Yeah. Ed, my name is Zach Hughes. I'm a wide advocate around here. Do many things. And my question to you, Ed, is one of the discussions I had in a boardroom recently was around the O&H. We talked about the O&H a little bit, and what we found is there was a trend of folks accepting the O&Hs to get out of the hospital without challenging them in a courtroom.
Unquestionably.
What somebody mentioned was they wondered what would happen if they challenged them in the courtroom, and they particularly had seen some O&Hs, they said to us that they wondered if they would be struck down those requests. And so I just wanted to put that out there.
That's a very good question, Zach. I think what happens in most cases is that the state will propose terms, and the lawyer for the individual will look at what they believe is possible, and they will do almost what you could characterize as similar to a plea agreement.
Right.
And so it's really not likely that the individual would be challenging that in court, because most of the time the individual signs off on it. Now, the amount of pressure that's on an individual to do that, that's the heart of the issue, and that's also one of the most difficult kinds of things to get past, because most people that have been there for a long involuntary hospitalization really want to get into the community. And so you're looking at forces that are very hard to, it's very hard to determine where the degree of what might be coercion and the degree of what is just agreeing to a reasonable plan. And very often, I think, in many cases, they are reasonable plans to help a person do well in the community. I'm not trying to characterize those things as, I'm not trying to over-characterize them as coercion. But in some cases, the individual is not happy. That's why on a philosophical level, Disability Rights Vermont thinks that our energy should be going in as much as is possible to help an individual and the system work together to figure out how to help a person work towards recovery. Because as soon as you turn the corner and bring the idea of coercion or force into it, admittedly, it may be inevitable in some situations, but I think in almost every situation, you're changing a therapeutic relationship. And that tends to last with someone, and it tends to affect the way they look at providers, sometimes for the rest of their life. And it's hard to rebuild a good therapeutic relationship. So we sort of feel like if there's a delay in filing for some kind of involuntary, that's usually a good thing, because that means the providers are looking to work with the individual to convince them, hey, this is what's in your best interest. And if someone accepts a treatment voluntarily, I think the chances that they're going to stay on that treatment over the long haul are generally greater. I'm not trying to say that covers every situation, but I think that's generally true, and we should generally put our energy into working towards a system that relies less on coercion. I saw a hand go up.
Well, that puts an end to this edition of Ableton on Air. I'm Lauren Seiler. Thank you for joining us for all three parts of Disability Awareness Day. This episode, the Mental Health Policy Update with Ed Penguin. I would like to thank the people at the State House for letting us at Orca Media and Ableton on Air to cover this important day. I'm Lauren Seiler. See you next time for another episode of Ableton on Air. Stay tuned.